Welcome. Welcome, everybody. I'm so excited to be here today. I think we've been waiting since 2011 in Johannesburg, South Africa, to actually be in this place. And I really feel privileged to be amongst my colleagues as well, and really very honoring of them. So even before I start, I would just like to share a little bit of history of how ECL really came to South Africa. I was attending the training, the Constellations training at Bern Reed for the second time. And on the train, on the way to the intensive, I thought to myself, I wonder how we can bring the systemic practice to children in schools. So I am a mother of 3 children and the wife of Ellen, and I actually live in Johannesburg. And this is why this question was came to me, is I've just had taken such wisdom from this work. And obviously as a mother, wanting to really bring this to my children and to their schools. And lo and behold, I arrived in Bern Reed, and there was Jane James and Judith Hemming, who asking people if you'd be interested in bringing systemic practice into schools. And the longer story short, a year later, I found myself in England with the late Terry and Jane and Fionnuala, and a big meeting. And there I was in my first ECL training, and that was me. Next thing, I invited Jane to Johannesburg, and myself and Rosada actually in Johannesburg started ECL together. So I'm hoping he's here somewhere. So how does this come to me, even from a systemic perspective? Actually, probably more important for those of you on the conference who understand systems and the movements behind movements of the soul. So growing up, I grew up in Johannesburg with a father who I actually, by the way, have put behind me today, is holding me in feeling his strength behind me. He's passed. And his story is very important in terms of ECL, and particularly from the South African perspective. He was the head of social welfare in Soweto, and the apartheid years. He went every day into Soweto to make sure that all children went to school. And his passion was in education. So clearly, this is how I grew up. And I take his passion, and it comes through me somehow, for sure. And I hold that in my heart, whether I like it or not. And bowing to his fate, I suppose, in some ways freed me. And in another way, by holding his passion, is something that really drew me towards ECL. And I was actually talking to my husband last night, and said it's actually been such a long journey. And even Raymond said earlier, sometimes quite a tough journey. And I think that's actually what's really held me so close to ECL, because it's something that's very strongly connected to my heart. So today, what I really want to do is talk about the 4 orders. And somebody asked me a couple of weeks ago, Janet, if you had to leave this world, what wisdom would you want to leave behind? And maybe because this conference is on my mind, I said, actually, it would be the wisdom of the 4 orders, and obviously the constellations wisdom, but within the constellations context, it would be the 4 orders. And I'm going to talk about what the 4 orders is, because I think most of you anyway possibly know what they are. So I'm just going to briefly go through that. But I want to tell stories, because I think the stories is what really moves us, and personal stories with schools and teachers. So Bert Hellinger, as you know, founded this work. But the work in terms of from an education perspective came through Mariana Frank-Rikst. And I had the privilege of working with Mariana here in South Africa, and later on at a conference in England. And her book, You're One of Us, is a book that we carry with us, carry it when we are going to any work I'm doing in schools. And what Bert Hellinger found was that these 4 orders, calls it the 4 orders of love. And the importance of how those four orders affect and impact our relationships, our relationship to ourselves, most of all, and then our relationships within our family systems. And how we embody these four orders very much impacts how we walk into the world, how we relate to our peers, to our family members, and even in organizations. So you'll find these orders not only in families, but also in schools and organizational systems. So I want to start off with the first one, which is I feel very close to myself. I think it's a very important order, which is belonging. And the bonding and the need to belong are strongest with children. And they are forces that constrain often the success and failure of group members and family members. So the question is very often people ask, where do I belong? What is the group that I belong to? And when we feel as though we don't belong, or we feel a rejection, this has an impact. So you can imagine children in the classroom coming into the school every morning, they're feeling, I don't belong in my class. And suddenly there's this anxiety that starts to happen. And this is what often does block children with, from learning. They call it today, attention deficit disorder. I actually call it an anxiety disorder. And so children start to feel anxious about this, not feeling as though they don't feel like they're in their right place as well. So one of the other orders is place, and we're going to go into that in a minute. And I want to also say something. While I'm talking, I want you to really embody what I'm saying and think about your own belonging. How do you feel like you belong in your system? What are the groups you feel a strong connection to, strong belonging? And where are you, in what groups do you feel sometimes that you don't really belong? And what is the places that you really feel a strong connection to and belonging? Now, obviously, the strongest belonging is to our ancestors and our family systems. And out of this belonging and this need for every human being to belong, we carry a very deep loyalty towards our families and our ancestors. And sometimes, I ask someone to mute themselves as somebody. No, I don't know. Feel like we're not belonging. We feel like we have been rejected. Sorry, I actually lost my train of thought from that noise. So let me carry on. What I was really talking about was the hidden loyalties. So these hidden loyalties is what drives us very often to carry a burden on behalf of our families, to take our own sense of belonging into other groups, and our own attitudes are based on that. So what they were talking about earlier, and I think Raymond or Jane was talking about how teachers, for instance, teachers come into a classroom and they have their own system that they, their own family system. And when they are not in a good place and they are not connected to their own family system, what often happens is they bring in their system, and there are a whole lot of children sitting in their classroom with their own families. And this becomes a struggle between the children and the teacher. And children can feel when a teacher is not respectful towards their families and towards their mothers. And suddenly there's this complication and an entanglement that starts to happen within the child in themselves. So they become entangled in a whole story that doesn't even belong to them. The story of the teacher and her family and their own family. So it's very important. And I'll tell you a quick story. Raymond spoke about Monkey earlier. Monkey is an amazing teacher from a school, Munseyville. And she came to one of our first trainings, went back, she said, I'm taking this back into my school, and I'm going to keep moving ECL into the school. And that's what she actually did. So just saying about ECL tools, and hopefully in the next 2 days, you're going to have an experience of the tools. So what she did is she started to bring in this element of an understanding amongst the teachers, telling them they are not the mothers of these children. And when we went with Monkey she phoned Raymond and I about 2 years later, she'd already been working in Munseyville. She said, guys, I am going to the Northwest Province to open my own ECL. This is the place I was born in. And I was so touched. And Raymond and I got in the car, I don't know what hour, at 6 o'clock in the morning, and drove 3 hours to the Northwest Province to her launch, her first workshop with about 18 principals and vice principals and teachers in the room. And we looked at one another and we said, Ray, we looked at Monkey and said, you're taking this. This is your workshop. And I actually got so emotional that day. And it was all about belonging, actually. That's what she was teaching. And she took one in a constellation. She asked one of the teachers to stand up as a parent and another one to represent the teacher. And she showed them, you know, you could see in the constellation, the relationship and the difficulty between the two. But what was most important when she looked, she explained afterwards what had happened in the constellation. She looked at this teacher and said, I want you to know that these are just your students. They are not your children. The children's responsibility for love and caretaking is with their parents, with their mothers. I cannot explain the breathing out movement of this teacher, this huge breath. And if anyone here, and I'm sure everybody probably knows about the history of South Africa, but also there's a lot of children that don't have parents anymore, that have died. And they're living in orphanages, or they are actually running the household at the age of 12 years old, taking care of other children. So naturally, there's a movement for teachers here to feel like they need to take care of these children. And that's a huge burden. So it becomes even more difficult to teach in that situation. So that was a great example of belonging, and in some way, and place, more than anything, because their place is the teacher. So I want to move quickly into place. And then what I also want to say, when I'm finished with these 4 orders, I'm going to give everybody an exercise. I'm going to put you in breakout rooms. But over and above that, if you have any questions, I think that you can put them in the chat as well. So place, so each person needs to find their right place.
Do you want the screen shared right now or no?
I think you can. Yeah, I think it probably is a good idea. Put that on, yeah. Okay. So people can see what I'm talking about. Their poster. Yeah, there you go. Thank you. That's wonderful. So as you can see, I think what's important about this picture, you can see here how everything is connected. All these 4 orders are particularly place, belonging, and even time. But place and belonging very much intersected with one another. So the place, what is the order of place? What do we mean by place? Each person needs to find their right place in the system, because it builds it builds trust in the system. You feel grounded. You know, I know that I'm the oldest daughter in my family, and that, just saying that actually makes me breathe out. I know my place. In organizations, in schools, it becomes a little bit more complicated, because again, we're all coming in with our own families and our place in our families. So when we talk about our place in a system, we have to understand, well, what is our role here? And as a teacher, so my place in the school is I'm a teacher or a social worker, or the CEO or gym instructor, whatever that is. So that also refers to place. Often what happens, so there's a natural hierarchy in place as well, in terms of families, siblings, and their orders. But what you sometimes do find in organizations, or what's most important, is priorities given to those who came before, but also those that give a lot to a system. So sometimes you will find somebody who's giving more, actually priority is given to them. So what also sometimes happens in families, becomes a little bit difficult in a divorce situation, where other siblings come in, half siblings, step parents. And it's very important to have a conversation with our children about that. It's very important for them to understand that the place of their parents, the parents give them life, and that takes priority. Those are their parents. And just by, even sometimes you can do it in a drawing, get children to actually draw their family and put them in the right place and just have that up on their wall so they understand. It kind of grounds them. It brings some kind of inner trust within their child. So it's a lovely exercise to do with children in terms of finding, helping them to find their place. It's kind of part of the container, bringing that safe container into a family, really understanding my place. Where this comes out of balance sometimes is you'll find, and I've seen this, when a sibling dies, you will find that what happens is another sibling may just take the place of that child who's died, particularly if that is the death is not really acknowledged. And so that's also important to know, that even in schools, when a child leaves the classroom, somehow an acknowledgement that the child had a place, that this was a child's place. So other children don't try and take on the place of their child. So what's most, and you see this in organizations, I very, very often see that when somebody is fired or leaves, there's an interrupted leaving in a system, that place is very hard to refill again. There's an energy there that is not, that kind of brings that organizational dynamic out of balance. So it's very important, and I think Raymond spoke earlier on about respect and honoring those who were there before. So there's time really, as you can see on this timeline, it refers to past. So my past, who born into this family, the events of my past, what are the events right now, and what am I looking towards the future? And so that's really a journey of time. And the most important aspect or principle around time is, again, about priority given to those that came first. Because we honor those because they actually brought others thereafter. So our parents come first, and then we have children and bring them thereafter. So the last one is exchange. And basically exchange is the fundamental principle of exchange is around give and take. So what we often find is, sorry, somebody's dog is barking in the background. So what we find with giving and taking, some people prefer, they give more naturally, and others will take. And I think from what I've, in my own experience, I'd say most people give more. They try and give more than actual take. And what happens often is there's an imbalance. But if there's too much giving or too much taking, too much of one or the other, you normally find in relationships, then somebody has to leave, and somebody will leave that relationship. It's just a natural movement because it becomes too much. The relationship becomes too burdensome on the one party. And also the other thing about exchanges is a natural generosity in exchange of gratitude. So I think that they spoke earlier on about that beautiful exercise where we bring children into a classroom. We ask them to write down on a piece of paper something about that child that they appreciate, and they give it as a gift to one another, acknowledging something about their own personal gift and what they bring into the classroom. So the other exercise we have very much for teachers is where we draw, and I want you to think about this, because when you go into your breakout rooms in a minute or so, I want you to think about all these orders I've spoken about, and which are the ones that really impacted you. You know, which of those orders you feel is sitting on your back at the moment. It feels like a pattern you want to break. And what we see very often, I'm going to finish off with this part of the exchange, what we see very often is teachers that are giving so much and they can't see their resources, or they don't have enough resource, and they're not taking or receiving. So their lives often feel very much out of balance because of this. And what I have noticed is when we sit down and we give them the exercise to use post-it notes, and they place all the children and families that they are giving to in front of them, and behind them they've got a few people, and then I look and I say, well, who are you not seeing behind you? Who have you forgotten about? And so often, suddenly people start, oh, my husband, my auntie, my friend, my church. So I think that's a wonderful exercise to do. And you're going to go and see Linda Bacon. I'm sure she's going to be giving a lot of amazing exercises. So I don't want to spend too much time on other people's exercises. But that's just a thought. I want you to hold that thought. So we're going to go into breakout rooms, and I think that Alison is going to manage that for us, put everybody in breakout rooms, and just have a conversation. Just introduce yourselves. Hello, my name is so-and-so from whichever country, and just talk about what impacted you in terms of what I've just spoken about, what impacts you now in your life the most of those 4 orders. And then we're going to come back. And then I'm going to answer some questions.
Janet, so we have just a few, there's only about 7 minutes left in this session. I don't know if that's going to be enough time, but we do have questions showing up, and maybe we can start by taking some of the questions that are showing up right now. So for example, one question is, can you say more about the concept of belonging in teaching?
So yes, so teachers belong. So when they come into a school, into a classroom, they belong in we belong to various groups. So they have a belonging to their own family system, and then of course now they belong in this classroom as a teacher. And when they go into the staff room, they belong to the school as a whole system. So what sometimes also becomes confusing, and I mean Mariana Frank talks about this a lot, is when a teacher's heart is not open to her own family, then it's difficult for her to open her heart to the children and their parents. So that becomes like a resistance that she brings in. But where they belong in the classroom with the children, they belong to the school, and they also belong to their family system. And other groups, whatever other social groups that they may be involved in, they belong. I hope that answers it. If there's, yeah. What other questions?
Let's see.
Another one?
So much of art, someone's saying, so much of what's being, I don't know if you can see the chat, so much of what's being said applies to adult learning as well, right? And
okay, very good point. So let me just say that I always say everyone counts. So when you look at a child, what are the stakeholders? Who affects children every day of their lives? It's adults. So actually parents, I think what's the most important thing I learned is how we can free our own children as parents. So if I'm speaking to parents, and I'm sure most people here are probably parents as well, the relationship that parents have with their own parents is very important, because children take from parents. So how a parent is in the world, a child takes naturally that behavior and attitude into their hearts. So if we heal as parents our own traumas and we take our burdens freely so that our children don't take them on. And the one most important thing, honestly, is this honoring of the fate of our families and bowing to our families. When you talk about respect, when we do that, everything else can heal, really. And I think that for me, I actually had a meditation I wanted to end with, which is about honoring and holding the fate of our family and not having to take on anyone's guilt. Guilt and fate belongs to those that own it. So somehow I think that when children can witness their parents being free, they can be free.
Mm-hmm. And Jana, I apologize. I actually messed up I'm getting the time all confused in my head. We do have until 1/4 the hour. So if you wanted to break us out, we could do that, to spend a little bit of time talking about these principles.
Yeah. Is there a lot of I'm happy just to answer questions and do the meditation. And maybe that's probably, you know, because we've only got how long?
So you have about 15 minutes in the session left. There's a question here that says, please explain again the order of love in relation to time. And I can share, I'll share the screen again so people can see that question, vector there, the time piece. How do you talk about that?
The time is interesting. So time is constant, of course, but it's also always one way, right? So it's only going one way. So when you think of time, its first time is, well, I've been on this planet for 56 years. So how long have I served an organization is very important. That refers to time. It's how long have I been here? How long have I been in this family, or how long have I been service of the school or this company or whatever that is? So that's the one aspect of time. The other one was the fact that when we start to give priority to people because of the time that they've served. So what I love about this, and we see this very often when we do constellations in organizations, you know, it's not about the position you hold. The time is actually even more important because you've given so much of yourself. So how much you've given to an organization also takes a priority. And what happens is that when a person is honored for the time that they've spent in a place, they get rewarded accordingly. Then that whole system can actually breathe out and be free. Sorry, let's have some water. It's a coughing from, I'm not used to talking for so long.
Yeah, cough for me.
Yeah. So what often also happens is new members that come in need to learn to adjust to the time of other people who've been there longer, and really honor that and respect that as well.
Janet, can you describe the exercise you do with the teachers when you ask them to line up in a long line?
Yes. So that's, or we do it in a circle. So sometimes we'll do it in a circle or a long line. And actually, I'm going to tell you an amazing story that Raymond has just reminded me, which is very close to my heart. It's a huge parastate in South Africa, where I was asked to come in, and the CEO was a young African man at the time, and he felt like he was new in this company and he was not being honored, or the relationships were not very good at that time. So I went into this business. There were about 60 people. And I asked them to line up. And on the floor, I placed the years that this company had been in existence. I think it was from 1963. And there was still an old man from 1963, I think, or 1973, who was present. And he stood at the one end, and everybody went and stood in the place when they had started at the company. It's a very good example of time. And I then asked everybody to turn to honor the man, the old guy who was there first. I cannot tell you the emotions in that room. And then I actually can still feel it in myself today. This bowing to him, and then we did a movement where everybody turned and bowed to everybody else who had come before them, and eventually to the CEO right at the top. And they started to tell their stories in time. Stories about the past, about an accident, and how they'd lost people, and the entire room was just filled with emotion. So that's a very good example of time. Yeah. Any other questions?
So there's another question here. Sorry about dog if you hear that, but exchange. So if you can elaborate on exchange, and I see that you also, you know, for each of these you have these questions here in the image. But how do you elaborate more on exchange?
Oh, exchange. Okay, it's a good one. Exchange. So the only time exchange should be if you want balance equal. Obviously, in every relationship, the ideal relationship would have an equal exchange of give and take. When you're referring to parents and children, parents just give to their children because they've given them life, and it's the one movement where there does not need to be an equal exchange. Now, often I have an argument when I talk about this, and the children say, but take care of my parents, they're old now. Yes, It's very different. This is an attitude. It's a behavior towards your parents. So you take physical care of them, but emotionally, they're still always going to be bigger than you. And so emotionally, they've always somehow hopefully taken care of you and looked after you. They brought you into the world. It's their right, actually, and it's your right as a child to take from a parent. They also say with teachers and students, teachers are giving to students, and they don't owe them. So when you're talking about exchange, there's this feeling of there's an owing. So when it's a natural actual owing. When somebody gives something to me, I want to give that gift back to them. I just, it's in your consciousness that you want to give back. So we have a natural feeling of giving and receiving. I have my own theory around this notion of martyrhood and giving too much and not taking enough. The interesting thing is that I feel, and I'm not even relating this from a constellations point of view, but I feel that when we take and we receive, we actually are giving people back. So there is a movement of giving when you take from somebody, because you are saying, I trust you enough to take from you.
Yeah, there's a lovely comment here. It says, it's really inspiring to see how much the emotional dimension can affect learning.
Yeah, and we've seen it. And there's a film on the website from, I think it was Ralph Allen, one of the first schools where they ran an experiment with. And they researched, they did some research, and Fianula can always talk to, I think somewhere obviously in Courageous Journeys, I've spoken about as well, where actually they saw, after they ran this experiment, how children's results were much higher at school, and their learning was much, much more engaging as well. Yeah, because it is inspiring. And it makes sense. I know from my own children, if they go to school and they're feeling bullied and they feel like they don't belong and they feel like, something's going on in the household where they don't belong, they're anxious. Or their mother's fighting with the teacher. Do I have to sit through this? And so there's too much going on. How can you be present to any learning?
Yeah. And here's a question. It says, can we assume that the giving in the case of parents is a kind of long-term investment? What do you think about that?
It's interesting. Yes, it's a lifetime investment to give to children. 100%. It's what, it's a contract that we made. It goes without saying, we've given life. And I just also want to say about this taking life and honoring. It's so important because, when you talk of self-worth of children, I see adult children, they're now adults, young adults, with such resistance to their mothers, and they'll say, I'm not going to be like my mother. I don't want to be like my mother. And then I'm looking at them and say, well, are you like your mother? Yes, of course you're like your mother. But how do I not be like my mother? It's not possible. She's your mother. And actually, when we bow and we see them in their beauty, in their soul, if you can look to them through the eyes of their soul, you can see through that, then you can understand, how important that connection is, and for one to bow to that fate. And when that happens, I've had experience in my own experience with my mother, that when I was able to honestly take her into my heart, my life changed, and I naturally became more successful in my relationship. So it's the most important relationship. And I think that's where, if anyone wants to heal, that's where they need to start. So that's why I've got this meditation. And it's about accepting what is, so that's, I don't know if we've got time.
Yeah, we definitely have time.
I think that it's a very important movement, this meditation. And it's honestly, for me, I ran this in a conference in December, and most of the people came and it just said, like, it's life-changing in some way. So right, I think what I'd like everybody to do is just get into a comfortable position. Let's get down and do it. So just get into a comfortable position on a comfortable chair, wherever you're sitting. And just feel your body breathing out. Just taking a deep breath. And put your right hand on your heart. And your left hand on your stomach. And breathe in, taking a deep breath. Grounded in the chair. Feel yourself held. Taking another deep breath. Count to 5. And slowly let out a breath. And repeat this 3 times, breathing in and out for 3 times.
Heart here.
Yeah. Can you mute everyone, Alison? Make sure everyone is muted.
Janet, can you unmute yourself? Because you got muted just now.
Feel your body starting to relax with your right hand on your heart, your left on your stomach. Now letting go of all present thoughts. And in your bodies, you feel your parents. After all, there is nothing in us that did not come from our parents in the beginning. We are our parents. So we let ourselves expand with that thought until we feel both parents in us as a whole. And that is as they really are or were. Without any wish that they should have been different, or any wish that you should be different. In the same way, you also sense their parents and all who belongs to their families. We agree to them. We honor them and their fate as we honor our own fate. We agree to them and their fate. With the greatest respect and with love, we bow in front of them and their families that came before. And in that movement, we can leave their fate to them. And we carry in our hearts all that remains and that always belongs, with love and gratitude. Take a few moments to ground yourself in this experience and feel your body, all the sensations that came up for you. Are you ready? You can open your eyes. Oh.
Thank you very, very much to Janet.
Maybe we can do a little, in lieu of loud, we can do a little twinkle or a gratitude to you, Janet. Thank you so much. I hope
Great
you
opportunity.
take a look at the gallery view just so you can see everybody. It's so beautiful.
Oh, I want to see how to do that. Oh my gosh. Wow.
There are 6 pages, 4 pages. You can keep scrolling.
It's amazing to see everybody, and really Fee and Jane and all my teachers. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And I'm hoping that, and I see even new faces, V, wow. So this is wonderful, so wonderful to meet. I feel like, part of all of you. As Raymond said, you belong to ECL. All of you.
Just to remind everybody that if you still have a question that came up during the presentation, this or any other presentation, feel free to put them on the chat and we will refer to them in one of the panels later on today or tomorrow or the day after. So somebody is monitoring the chats. We are all monitoring the chats and we're following up questions and inquiries. So really feel free to reflect, comment, or ask anything that might be of interest to you. So well, thank you very, very much again to Janet Goldblatt. And we're going to have a break. Yes, we're going to have another little break between the
5 minute, just short
5-minute break between the sets. I'm going to be presenting next. I'm going to be taking you on a journey with visualization, virtual constellation, hypno constellation, and an opportunity to experience some unusual ways to represent and find resources. So coming up in about 5-6 minutes, we'll take a short break and we'll be back soon.